Cluster 2 of the local questionnaire concerns land administration in practice, and in particular how rights holders are accessing land-related services from the government, including identification, demarcation, mapping, and registration. States that have ratified the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights have certain obligations related to land administration. In General Comment 26 from the UN Committee on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, the committee has clarified that parties to the covenant, which is most countries in the world, have an obligation to refrain from any discriminatory acts during land registration and land administration, including on the basis of marital status, legal capacity, or access to economic resources, and also to ensure that the legitimate tenure rights of individuals and communities, even within customary tenure systems, are recognized and respected. The state obligations to protect rights include an obligation to take measures to ensure that all persons have a reasonable degree of security in relation to their relationship with land, in genuine consultation with persons and groups concerned, to recognize and protect communal dimensions of tenure, particularly in relation to indigenous peoples, peasants, and other traditional communities, and to ensure that any title process that involves determining competing claims to land protects the rights of those most at risk of marginalization and discrimination. This is all from the General Comment 26 from the UN Committee on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. Finally, the state obligations to fulfill rights include making sure that the process of recognizing and allocating tenure rights is carried out systematically without discrimination, that land administration shall be based on accessible and non-discriminatory services implemented by accountable agencies whose actions are reviewed by judicial bodies, and that disadvantaged and marginalized individuals and groups shall be supported in using those services, and that their access to justice shall be guaranteed. So these are some of the aspects that the local questionnaire seek to investigate from a rights holder's perspective. In the international human rights instruments that concern indigenous peoples' rights, including ILO Convention 169 and the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, we find several paragraphs that underline the rights to recognition of their land rights and also their rights to participate in this process. The UN Declaration on the Rights of Peasants and Other People Working in Rural Areas emphasize the need to recognize customary land tenure rights that are not currently protected by law. In the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, also known as CEDAW, we can find several articles that support the rights of women to non-discrimination in land governance, including the article on eliminating discrimination against women in rural areas, but also women's rights to participate in the implementation of development planning at all levels. This also includes, for example, local land governance councils, and also the equal rights that women should have to administer property, to inherit, etc. Some of the questions in the cluster concern information availability, for example, about land ownership. So it's important to emphasize here that there are human rights standards on information access. In the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, there is a right to access information held by public bodies. Governments should facilitate this access to information with a particular focus on marginalized and discriminated groups and individuals. And also it should be easy to access information. It should either be free of charge or available at a reasonable cost. The processes for getting the information should be short, and that there should be mechanisms for an independent review in cases of information request refusals. In the online version of the local questionnaire, I'll click on Cluster 2, Responsible Governance of Tenure. It's important to note here that the questions concern public processes related to identification, demarcation, and mapping and registration of land, so those involving public authorities, because this is assessing the state's implementation of fair and open and transparent processes with participation of rights holders concerning recognition of their rights to land, property, and natural resources.